It didn't explode. It excused itself. On mid-watch over the Mare Tranquillitatis Ray, we were doing the usual sacred trivia of keeping a civilization tidy, nudging a forgotten cubisat out of a survey path, arguing about coffee filters, betting if the Aurora Oval would reach Texas by dawn when Earth softly stepped sideways. First there was the Ripple, ocean spectrum instruments, the ones that listened for whale gossip and storm grumbles. All reported the same impossible chord, low, long, and kind. Like a cathedral organ holding a breath, the magnetosphere rang. Street grids on the night side flickered in sympathy. Our scopes blinked, thinking lens cap, then refocused and found nothing where everything had been. Not debris, not a shock front, not a hot smear of catastrophe. Just absence, a wet ring of vapor where the top of the atmosphere had been. A silver lace of ionization where the beanstalk's cable had cut the air and then found no anchor. The Aurora didn't collapse, it recoiled, like a hand pulling back from a burned stove. Acquisition lost, said the array's soft voice, struggling not to sound personal. It tried again. Acquisition. Absent. The room did what control rooms do when the universe flips the table, expanded, and tightened at the same time. We got loud and precise. Someone's chair rolled too far. Someone's pen hit a console and snapped exactly in half. A line of ink like an obituary. Confirm with secondary, confirm with tertiary, confirm with the telescope that never lies. None of them lied. The blue albedo we used to set our clocks by was gone, and every screen showed the same new hole in the sky. On the far end of the pit, a tech wearing a hoodie that said "It's always Thursday somewhere" put both hands flat on her console, like she could hold reality still. Where, she asked in a voice shaped for jokes, did we put the planet? Nairobi Control came up on wideband. A little late because ground systems hate miracles in both directions. The chief sounded like someone wading through waist-deep water with a baby and a clipboard. No pump, no anthem. She was counting. Skyhooks detached, she said, breath running between words like a dog. Arcology tethers free. Elevators in controlled collapse. Repeat, controlled. We're not catching anything we can't cradle. If you are in the air, glide. If you are in water, float. If you are on the ground, share. She paused for an inhale you could hear down the spine of the beanstalk, that no longer had a sky to lean on. If you can hear us, oxygen, water, neighbors, breathe, share, we'll be back. There are speeches that build nations, and there are sentences that keep people alive long enough to have nations. That one did the second thing and wrote itself into every heart. That needed orders softer than screaming. The beanstalks, those high silver ladders we had convinced gravity to respect, let go like professionals. Counterweights burned their choreographed arcs into the upper dark. Segments scissored and folded, shedding load like good math. Above the Atlantic, a skyhook's head rang itself hollow and drifted with the lights still on. A cathedral unmoored. Ships on ascent arcs cut engines and listened to their ancestors. Pilots made ellipses out of panic. The training took, aviate, navigate, communicate in that order and with that kindness. In the silent gap where Earth's squawk had been, Luna-based traffic stepped into a god they did not want and did not pretend to be. Priority to vessels with children, traffic said, not shouting. Priority to anyone carrying air. If you have more than you need, you don't. Speak up. On the Tranquillitatis Ray, the console under my hands had turned into a rosary. Switches, toggles, familiar beads to keep the mind from sprinting into fire. My partner Juno, who could fix anything with a hex key and a story about her aunt, began reading the wrong checklist with perfect calm. I didn't stop her. We both needed the cadence. Stabilize the betas, she said, even though we had none. Check the soul. I mean the soil. Check the soil. The first wave of calls from the surface hit, then not to us, to anyone. City nets, emergency bands, a ham operator on a kitchen table with a dented radio. Nairobi to orbit. We have refugees from the cliffside towers. Elevation's okay, mud bad. Send blankets you don't love. Manos to whoever river still flows. We turned the stadium into a lung. Bring buckets and jokes. Mumbai trains stopped at the new seaside. People walked. It's polite today. No one asked where the planet had gone. The math could wait. The living could not. The calendar started over at some point without ceremony. The last entry in a tired sysadmin's log file, timestamped 2 hours after vanishing, simply changed the header on a template. Year 1 after, it stuck. Even the pedants let it. We learned the shape of orbital grief. It is not crying at a flag. It is not shaking a fist at an empty patch of gravity. It is inventories. It is triage. It is strangers calculating how far they can stretch a pressure suit left unzipped to fit a second. Smaller body. On the second day after, a tug out of Clavius dragged a greenhouse dome far enough that we could park evac shuttles under it. Without playing chess with shadows, we ate frost-burned lettuce and called it a feast because it was shared. Juno drew bees on the oxygen cylinders and wrote for the kids. For the bees that will have kids later. A scientist on Tycho found 3 ways to make dust hold heat like a promise, and emailed them to everyone with the subject line "Stupid trick, good results." On the 3rd day, we held our first funeral for someone who hadn't died but had to be let go old Earth. Filed under pending return. It was 15 minutes because schedules were safety now. We played Rain on a cheap speaker and gave out towels. We did not pray to be rescued. We scheduled being okay. Every habitat, rock, and rope got an appointment with the future. In the quiet hour between alarms, you could hear people learning a new alphabet of care. We have room. We don't, but we have imagination. Stand here, it's safer. Drink this. Talk later. Work now. No, talk now. Work can wait. We named what we built because names are ladders, and we needed a million ladders. The lattice we started stitching between rocks and stations got called the Waygrid by a kid who thought it sounded like a road and a net at once. The name stayed. We burned it into the side of the first way station, an ugly cylinder with polite air, and an immortal coffee pot. We etched it into the rights we invented on purpose, courtesy, doctrine, state name, and intent. Help or stop, be safe corridors, don't aim engines, or anger at pollinators. Present or future, hot work permits for hostility if you must be stupid. Be predictable apology formats, how to say we broke this, and we'll fix it without theater. By the end of the first month after, my notebook had lists that would become scripture later. They weren't laws. They were habits. We wrote them not to look good to history but to survive it. At night, when there was night, Luna is bad at kindly shadows. I went up to the small blister above the array and watched the gap where Earth had been. It wasn't black. It was possibility-shaped, like a seat kept for a friend who might yet walk in with wind in her hair and a story about why. She's late. Juno came up once, sat beside me, and handed me a cup that had pretended to be coffee and had settled for being hot. We didn't talk about vanishing. We talked about returning as if it were a task on the whiteboard. Do you think she meant it? Juno asked finally, chin jutting at the little plaque we'd bolted to the bulkhead where we could see it and be steadied by it. Nairobi Control's last line, printed on titanium. Thumb smudged by 100 frightened hands, we'll be back. She's a planet, I said. She doesn't say things she doesn't mean. Juno snorted. You think planets have mouth filters now? I think, I said. We'll build one for her if she didn't. Year 1 turned into 2, and then 10, then 50. People born after grew into the roles we designed in exhaustion and discovered they were comfortable in competence. They studied weather the way their great-grandparents studied stocks. They made music that sounded like maintenance done with love. They married in airlocks and kitchens and gardens with chains hung for rain. On Founding Day, every year, somebody somewhere read the Nairobi message into a room full of full lungs and labeled shelves. And somebody always cried at neighbors. We told each other, quietly and then loudly, over and over, while we invented the things that would carry us the long way around the hole. Home is not a place. It's a schedule we keep for each other. 500 years is long enough to turn grief into muscle. It is also exactly the time it takes for a habit to feel like heritage. On year 500 after, at for 13 Waygrid standard, gravimeters across the system hiccuped like someone's heart remembering the downbeat. To a favorite song, L5 lit, no, not lit, woke as if geometry had struck a match and said, oh, there you are. Every scope that could point did. Every hand reached for someone else's sleeve. Every mouth that had taught someone to breathe without earth in the sky whispered the same thing with new breath ready, But the waking, that's another chapter. This one ends with absence correctly labeled, with the first checklists pinned to the wall. With a hole in the sky, we learned to go around without pretending it wasn't the center. With Nairobi's last sentence bolted above every console that matters: breathe, share, we'll be back. 500 years is long enough to turn grief into muscle memory and muscle memory into culture. In year 2 after, we stopped waiting for miracles and built timetables. The first way station was an ugly drum of habit held together by borrowed bolts, and a promise painted big enough to shame us into keeping it. Waygrid Node 1, air water welcome. The coffee tasted like hot apologies. No one complained. You don't complain about the first cupboard you can reach in the dark. By year 5, the Waygrid was a necklace of bright crumbs across black bread nodes every few million kilometers. Predictable as buses, stubborn as teeth. We learned to standardize the boring things so the big things could be beautiful. Docking rings fit everything from a beater tug to a wandering cathedral. Tool libraries checked out torque wrenches with the same ceremony as books. Every node carried 3 redundancies: air, power, kindness. We codified the reflexes that had saved us in the first days into doctrine that would save strangers later. It was not poetry. It was a to-do list that became religion by schedule. Courtesy doctrine: state your name and intent. We will help you do it safely, or we will stop you. Both are love. Be safe corridors. Don't aim engines or anger at pollinators, present or future. If you don't know what a bee is, ask a child. Hot work permits for hostility. If you must be stupid, be predictable. Apology formats: how to say we broke this, and we'll fix it without theater. We got good at apology. Early on we apologized like kings. Too loud, too late, too clever. The new way was receipts. We rationed 6 liters and should have rationed 5. Here's who went thirsty. Here's the repair. Here's the cake we made when it worked. People forgave numbers faster than excuses. We taught children the sound of rain by hanging chains in gardens and letting wind explain. In ring farms we learned to trick tomatoes into believing in gravity with gentle lies. We stopped pretending. Heroism was a lightning strike and started scheduling it as maintenance. We found neighbors and onboarded them like family moving into the spare room. The Tlaloc came up first. Gill-lunged traders who had lived for millennia in Europa's midnight brine. They arrived shivering in light, unsure if we meant ally or aquarium exhibit. We built cool corridors in the Waygrid, blue tunnels the temperature of secrets, and asked what they needed in the same tone we used for air filters. They taught us how to carry cold like a sacrament. We taught them price lists that didn't cheat on page 2. Their first child born in air named herself Syllable of Glacier Sung and answered to glee. The Kijani came out of a basalt hollow in series, fur-dusted with drill grit, hands perfect for calibrating delicate lies. They saw our tool libraries and fell in like ducks discovering water-had verbs. They turned wrenches into a literature. How to persuade a reluctant valve: 5 parables. On the dignity of left-handed threads. Their grandmothers developed a mania for gutters: flexible, modular, an art form of guiding rain that isn't to where it wants to be needed. On founding days, Kijani kids recited the apology formats with mischievous pride, adding variations with excellent footnotes. Other species drifted in like poems we didn't know how to read until we heard them sung. The Aeon artisans, who stitched light into counting, taught us to make HUDs that didn't lie at night. The whole patient, bark-skinned architects from a comet made of weird taught us to brace for stress to problems. Before it arrived, the bargain was always the same. You bring what you have, we label it honestly, we add a chair. The Waygrid taught war how to behave in public. Pirate flotillas and nervous patrols came bristling for the old stories. The grid handed them numbers, forms, and tea. State your intent, Port Authority would say, bored but kind. If it's hostile, take a number. We'll park you where no one gets singed while you posture. If you shoot, we will stop you with competence, which scales better than rage. Half of them surrendered to embarrassment before any drone had to move. The other half met the administrative side of mercy, legal knots, and sandbox of shame sims where dangerous packets went to loop until their authors learned to declare a B impact. We did politics the way we did pipes, with labels and access. Habitat councils met in rooms with good vents and patient chairs. No anthems, Minutes posted in the open by whoever wrote sentences best. We stopped rewarding charisma and started voting for people who liked spreadsheets. We didn't always get it right, but when we failed, we could say how. And that was the door to getting better. Somewhere along the way, maybe year 12 after, maybe year 90, founding day became a holiday you could set your calendar to. Even if your rock spun weird. Every node boiled soup in industrial pots. The first page of the Nairobi transcript was read aloud at shift change, and somebody always cried at neighbors. After the reading, people put on gloves and fixed something they'd been pretending not to see. We kept grief honest. The old Earth memorials were not statues of flags in wind. They were rooms with work, a desk where you could write the name of someone who should have seen this and tape it under a hook labeled "Next Time Bring." A wall where you could check out the tools they loved. A plaque that said, "Home is a schedule we keep for each other." People touched it like a rosary when alarms were only polite. We did not become saints. We still had black markets and old appetites, raids and bad bosses. Weeks where nothing you planted grew. The difference was expectation. When someone hoarded water, they were not a rebel. They were a broken pipe. We sent the plumbers legal, literal, cultural, and fixed it with wrenches and receipts. When a habitat went shabby and mean, the Waygrid assigned a mentor and a spreadsheet and a grandmother with a B on her badge. Who could make the most stubborn man in the room sit and listen? By the 3rd century, the grid had rhythms. Ships departed on beats you could tap your foot to. Kids ran errands across orbits as if they were alleys. Boredom became a prize proof the vents were clean and the benches were many. We mapped the system not by territory but by competence density. Tourists came to see the rings of Saturn and stayed to see a barge captain teach probability with dice and soup. The old maps had put Earth at the center. The new ones put Waygrid node 0 in an empty patch of sky with a note. We have a hole. We go round it together. On anniversary hundreds, some wag would draw a tiny blue marble in the margin holding a sign, "Back soon, learning." We laughed. We meant it. Our language grew scaffolding around that faith. We said circling home when we meant taking the long way but not lost. We said neighbor when we meant kin with different plumbing. We said hot work when we meant don't panic, but put your gloves on. A century before return, a Tlaloc poet and a Kijani wrench wrote a prayer disguised as a checklist and bolted it above a node's hatch. It spread, the way useful things do, watered, fed, rested, neighbored. You could ask it of a greenhouse, a crew, a policy. If you failed the last box, you failed all of them eventually. The bees approved literal and metaphor, buzzing where flowers and budgets met. In year 487 after, a kid on a freighter playing with a star map asked her mother why the empty center wasn't scary anymore. Because we filled it with work, her mother said, and taught her how to read a maintenance schedule like other families teach hymns. In year 498, Port Authority added a new line to the founding day reading, practical as a wrench and twice as comforting. If she comes back, we have ladders. People laughed through their tears and bought more rope. We did not pray for rescue. We made being rescuable a default. We built the Waygrid so that if Earth returned with broken legs, there would be tugs to carry her until she remembered how to stand. We rehearsed welcome the way other civilizations rehearsed war with drills and clipboards and snacks, over and over until even the shyest person at the back of the room knew where the towels lived. It took 5 centuries to become the kind of people who could hear a planet say terms and answer we already live by them. By the time gravimeters hiccuped on year 500 after, the hole at the center of our map wasn't a wound anymore. It was a seat we'd kept warm. The first hint wasn't light, it was weight. Gravimeters across the Waygrid hiccuped at 413, one clean skip like a heart remembering the downbeat to an old song. On Luna, coffee sloshed left in 1,000 mugs. At Saturn, a tug captain swore gently and tightened a strap he'd trusted for 20 years. The mare beneath our rate ticked, then held steady, as if the moon had braced for a guest to step onto its porch. L5 anomalies, said the array. Voice even, a touch breathless. Not threat class, event class. We pointed every lens we had and a few we borrowed from neighbors who owed us soup. The patch of sky we'd labeled node 0, seat kept warm, began to shine not flare, but wake a dawn in place rather than in time. Geometry arranged itself like a careful host laying out chairs. Then Earth slid back, not falling, not appearing, but arriving the way a ship docks when every thruster trusts the wind. She was herself and not. Familiar blues felt through gauze. A skyskin a translucent, living shell-glove the atmosphere, veined with slow light like frost that had learned circulation. The continents wore kindness at their edges, coastlines smooth where history had hurt, deserts cross-hatched in terraces that told water where, not if. All our doctrine did exactly what it had been built to do, stayed calm. Got busy. Port Authority didn't switch to uniforms. They clicked the welcome macro we used for nervous freighters and old friends, state name and intent. Be safe corridors apply. We will help you do it safely, or we will stop you. Both are love. The reply came on all bands, and also somewhere softer pressure in the ears. A hush in the sinus bones like standing under a storm porch and knowing the rain sees you. We are Gaia Ray, caretaker and consensus. We left to mend. We return with terms. Juno stopped breathing long enough for me to nudge her shoulder. She talks like an engineer and a choir, she whispered. Then put her palm flat on the console the way we had the night the blue light went out. The terms scrolled. They weren't a manifesto. They were a work order. Care index is greater than or equal to 0.7 for any polity seeking landfall. Language hospitality. At least 3 neighbor tongues, including 1 non-human. Repair tithe, pledge 10% of surplus to coral, soil, and sky. Right of apology, say what you broke in the hunger years. Show who you mended after. There was a pause as a system measured our posture. The light on our be safe indicator went a warm, pleased amber. Home is a verb, Gaia said. And every docked chalkboard in the grid added the sentence, without being asked. We laughed thin at first, then full, not at the terms, at the relief of being asked for exactly what we had trained to give. Push the receipts. Port Authority said. The grid did. Maintenance cams stitched 5 centuries of boring miracles into a dossier, tool libraries with overtime punches, union charters that turned factories of people into factories of things. Beat corridors mapped in 3 dimensions. The first apology format filled by a furious habitat that had learned to aim its fury at plumbing and law, not throats. Footers listed cake served on repair complete with a photo, because sugar is infrastructure. Gaia's skyskin brightened along the equator acknowledged in a language we hadn't known we knew. Do we send ships? Juno asked. It was the wrong question and also the right one. We send chores, I said. But chores come later. First came curiosity. We watched Earth like we had never been allowed to before. With permission and responsibility. Storms moved in accord, their edges negotiated, not walled. A cyclone flexed, glanced off a chain of heat sinks glittering like a fisherman's net, and calmed as though someone had sung to it. Night city fire winked in patterns that were more pulse than sprawl. A hatch eye, our eyes open in the skyskin over the Pacific, and the grid held its breath. What came out was not a ship, unless you count gardens as ships. A raft of skydocks, unfurled ovals with ribs and lungs, braced to kiss the shell and feed power in both directions. They drifted to pre-printed anchor points we could see in our highest magnification. Tiny hand icons saying, "Hold here." Port Authority pinged the first dock with the politeness reserved for strangers who might be family. We have ladders, she said, which had been a joke on posters for 100 years and a promise for 500. Bring them, Guy answered, smiling in volts. And your neighbors, the waygrid obliged like a habit. Convoys butted from every orbit where we had stacked good intentions and spares. Tugs hitched to reef frames. Barges carrying ring farm loam and slices like cake. Tlaloc chill siphons gleaming like moonlight made practical. Kajani gutters coiled like patient snakes eager to tell rain news stories. Before any downwell, Guy asked us for the thing we most loved providing, inventories. Declare your care index, list your tongues, show your tithe, staple your apologies, numbers flowed. So did voices. The grid sounded like a market at dusk, everyone talking. But you could find your friend by the honesty in their vowels. A few polities hesitated. One frontier habitat radioed, aggrieved, we already suffered. Must we fill forms to touch dirt? Forms are how we don't break what you suffered to reach, a Tlaloc counselor replied. Bring your ledger. We'll bring biscuits. They met on a note over series, and someone put a B sticker on the cover when they were done, because they had earned it. We watched the first door open for us, an oval in the sky skin over the Lamu corridor. Air vented just enough to smell like salt and sun on wetwood. The sky skin flexed, calibrated, welcomed. A B-safe lane lit itself from orbit to dock, clear as a runway and twice as considerate. Juno's hand found my sleeve. We go. We route, I said, which is how some of us are allowed to go. We threaded the grid's first downwell chore convoy along that lit seam. Even the drones seemed to fly with their backs a little straighter. Over the Soul, Gaia inhaled. We exhaled soil. Over the barrier reef, Gaia blinked go. And children, who had practiced in tanks, with chain-hung rain-planted frames on stone, over a Midwest that wore new ribbons of river. We let go of seed and heirloom microbes like confetti from a patient parade. All the while, the apology rites began. You don't cry at an apology rite if you're in charge of clocks. You check microphones twice and the spare power thrice, and make sure there are chairs for the stubborn who never sit. Then you step aside and let people be specific. A Jovian freehold said, "We called wage theft custom. We are sorry. These are the names. These are the repayments indexed. We wrote a law that won't let us be clever there again." The crowd clapped in the practical rhythm used for forklifts and hard truths. A Martian agriplex said, "We did monoculture. It was tidy and cruel. We are sorry. We brought heirloom seeds and the old songs that teach patience. They showed seedlings, fragile in trays and fierce in intent." A belt cartel turned co-op said, "We privatized air. We are sorry. Here is the new charter. Here are the keys." Juno leaned on the console and whispered, "That's the one that keeps me up." And I let myself nod. The language hospitality clause made our radios sound like music. Trade tongue braided with Kijani tapcant, Tlaloc water pearl, Holt bark meter, and something we hadn't heard in 5 centuries, coastal Swahili and Cebuano and Dine, swinging through syllables like they remembered us and had been doing their own push-ups while we were away. The few who failed an audit didn't receive thunder. They received mentors' grandmothers with B's, Kijani foremen with too many pencils, Tlaloc deacons who could filter sorrow out of a room by naming it without romance. "You are at 0.62, one said, as if announcing a fever. "Here is soup. Here are forms. We'll sit with you until you see which pipe is lying." Gaia's tone throughout was steady, like a metronome that had found our preferred tempo and approved. When a drone barge kissed a rookery with a heat plume, blue alert, sings hurt. The entire schedule did what it had been rehearsed to do, bent. Tugs shifted lanes. A hold architect threw shade with a flick. A Kijani gutter writhed to a kinder curve. The apology filed itself before lunch with a jar of smoke scrub salve attached. The rookery sang again by dusk, and the grid updated the chart so we wouldn't learn the same lesson twice. Near the end of the first week, Gaia spoke a sentence that made Port Authority put a hand over her mouth, like she'd sworn in front of children. "We were not saving you," Gaia said. "We were making sure we deserved you." Juno made a small noise and pretended it was dust. "Who taught her to say that?" "We did," I said, and felt it, the click of 5 centuries of schedule falling into place with a sound I had been waiting to hear since the night the blue light went out, when the first landfall charter was signed at Lamuno deed. Just a maintenance schedule and a phone number to call when a pipe lied. People didn't cheer first. They stacked chairs, then they cheered. Then they fixed a railing someone had been embarrassed by for a decade. Then they danced badly and beautifully while a Tlaloc drummer found the beat. That made Earth's new wind feel like an old auntie patting your back when you've done the right thing. At shift change, we paged the old ritual. The Nairobi transcript filled the square with a voice that had kept us alive and civil. When it reached neighbors, a child in a B shirt lifted a hand and added the new line Gaia had asked us to add. We did. "We're here." Above us, the sky skin parted a mile-wide smile. No parade, just wind with salt in it, and the smell of green so thick even the boldest among us admitted to leaking a bit at the edges. Back at the array, I ran the founding day checklist out of habit and added a 5th line with a pencil that had learned to keep up. Watered, fed, rested, neighbored, reported, receipts attached. Gaia's final broadcast for the season was the best kind, a footer. Welcome home. Keep the schedule. Juno leaned her head against mine, a small, practiced weight. Do you think she'll stay? She already did, I said, and meant the we more than the she outside. The blue light we had taught ourselves not to depend on burned through the sky skin in gentle, shifting hues. It did not make us smaller. It made our lists feel like liturgy. We routed the next convoy. We checked the bees. We kept the schedule. You don't greet a planet with trumpets. You greet her with checklists. When Earth slid back, swaddled in that translucent sky skin veined with slow light, Port Authority didn't scramble dreadnoughts. They pushed a button labeled Welcome Kit and read out the same lines. We'd taught 1,000 nervous freighters, state your name and intent. We will help you do it safely, or we will stop you. Be safe. Corridors apply, Earth Gaia Ray. As the voice called, itself answered with a tone that felt like rain remembering your roof. We are caretaker and consensus. We left to mend. We return with terms. Terms weren't demands. They were maintenance. Care index is greater than or equal to 0. 7 for any polity seeking landfall. Language hospitality at least 3 neighbor tongues. 1 non-human repair tithe 10% surplus pledge to coral. Soil, sky right of apology. Admit what you broke in the Hunger Years. And who you mended after. Juno looked at me over the console we'd once used to count roras. We already live like this, she said. Like someone discovering they've been obeying a law for years out of courtesy. Then we send receipts, I said. And we did. The first convoy that formed wasn't an armada. It was chores with engines. Tugs loaded with reef frames nested like rib cages. Soil barges stacked like layer cake. Topsoil grown in ring farms and inoculated with the kind of old life that remembers how to be new. The Tlaloc rigged cold siphon silver jellyfish rigs that could reach into fevered bays and whisper temperature back toward kindness. The Kijani arrived with gutters and a mania for downspouts, because all restoration is really about telling water where to go without scolding it. Our job at Mare Tranquillitatis was to route be safe corridors. No hot plumes over pollinator zones. No loud burns over breeding grounds. We drew sky lanes like embroidery, threading ships through Earth's new shell to docks that hadn't existed 5 minutes earlier, and felt inevitable anyway. Gaia opened doors, oval vents rising in the sky skin, each with a little icon like a friendly hand. Mind the edge, she said. And the transliterators didn't have to work hard to make it sound like home. Inside the shell, the air tasted like first day of school. Clouds moved on rails while their edges learned to be wild again. The continents were themselves plus mercy, coasts with healed margins. Deserts quilted in patient geometry where water had been invited back with terraces. And shade instead of conquest. We parked the soil barges over sites that had waited half a millennium for topsoil. In the Soul, cranes lowered brown like a blessing while a choir from Mars tuned harmonies written for thin air, and found they worked fine and thick. On the Great Barrier, kids in rash guards human and Tlaloc. Kijani tails twitching for balance bolted reef frames into new lattices, while drones seeded polyp kits that came with 2 instructions and a song file. At the first apology rite, nobody wore uniforms. People wore tool belts and the 10-meter stare of those who've scheduled their nerves. Delegations took turns at a mic that had been tested 6 times and taped to the floor. A free habitat from the belt went first. We rationed 6 liters when 5 would have done, their envoy said, their voice purely administrative. Here's the list of who went thirsty. Here's the plumbing we built after. Cakes served at repair complete. They held up pictures of cakes like documents. A node from Jupiter's shadow said, we turned a factory of people into a factory of things. We are sorry. The union charter is attached. Here are the back wages, indexed, paid. Receipts stapled. An agriplex from Mars said, we forgot insect names and called them pests. We are sorry. B-screen panels we built now. Pollen routes mapped. We brought seeds and the children who can identify them better than we can. It could have been theater. We made it boring on purpose. Boring is how you keep hard things from escaping into speeches when it was our turn. Port Authority hair grayer. B. Bad Shinier spoke like she was opening a meeting that would end on time. We didn't break you. She told the sky. But we broke around you. We are sorry for the hard years we sharpened into other people. We learned to soften. We brought ladders. She clicked to the long slide with the receipts and didn't apologize for the font. Gaia's reply was a warm light in the vents and a sentence that tickled every old checklist I'd ever loved. Acknowledged. Mentors assigned where indices fail. Continue. Mentors arrived like beloved aunts, with biscuits, spreadsheets, and a willingness to sit through bad meetings without quitting. A stubborn habitat that kept failing language hospitality. We speak trade, isn't that enough? Found itself visited by a Tlaloc grammarian and a Kijani playwright, who installed a story hour in 3 tongues. The care index crept over the line not because they learned phrases, but because they learned neighbors. The repair tithe turned into a culture overnight. Markets started labeling goods with a coral sticker, and the percentage debugged back into earth. 10% to mangrove nurseries, 2% to dust baffles in the sow, 1% to bees. People bragged about their tithing mix like coffee orders. I took a leave from the array to ride a Downwell convoy, unofficial title, Convoy of Chores Number 7. Juno said, "Bring me dirt," and tucked a new hex key in my pocket like a charm. We docked with a shell hatch over the Lamo corridor. The air that kissed my face had salt in it and a complicated promise. The skyskin flexed to our pressure like a kind animal. A Kijani forewoman with a pencil behind her ear handed me a checklist and a shovel, neither of which apologized for their weight. "Gutters first," she said. "Then mangroves. Then we go home and count and come back and count again." "What about speeches?" I asked. "Those are gutters too," she said. "They tell the flood where to go so it doesn't drown the kitchen." We planted mangroves hip deep, cursing and laughing and grateful that mud is a problem. That only cares whether you showed up in boots. A Tlaloc child taught me how to breathe less when the smell got interesting. A Martian engineer taught a group of local teenagers how to read Wind the Way. You read a cranky ant attend to the small noises. At dusk, a local choir and a Waygrid one met in the ruins of a ferry dock and tried to find a key that didn't make anyone feel like a guest. They did. Birds joined. A kid cried because he had never heard that many throats agree on air. In a square that had spent 500 years remembering how to be itself, the first landfall charter was signed. It was not a deed. It was a maintenance schedule. Gutters to clear this week and next. Mangrove inspections. Complaint lines you could call when a pipe lied. It had a box labeled "If this is boring." Good, and a place for signatures and a stamp that smelled like rubber. And responsibility. People clapped and then stacked chairs because the tide was coming, and the work did not care about ceremony. The audits weren't pass, fail so much as keep going. A polity that came in at care index 0.65 looked sick until Gaia paired them with 3 neighbors, and a grandmother with a bee who knew how to turn policy into chores. 6 months later they were at 0.72 and had invented a new form. We meant well, and here's what we broke. Gaia herself never thundered. She assigned. She sent reminders. Her warmth was a thermostat that made the right kinds of work easier. When someone asked for an exception, she said, "Show me your repairs," and meant it. Language hospitality made for great radio. Port Authority sounded like music trade. Kijani Tapcat, Tlaloc Water Pearl, Holt Bark Meter, and a new one. Earth Old. Coastal dialects dusted off and polished for neighbors to borrow. Kids switched mid-sentence without apology and invented jokes that needed 2 throats to land. On the 5th day of landfall, a mistake hurt a drone barge's heat plume kissed a rookery. We saw the alerts, the blue ones that mean life singing Hurtan, the whole schedule bent. Tugs relocated. A hold architect threw shade with a flick of bark. A Kijani gutter writhed into a new angle. The apology was filed before noon and included a jar of smoke scrub their grandmothers swore by. The rookery survived. The lesson stuck. The charts updated. The habit deepened. On the 7th night, Founding Day met Returning Day on a calendar and decided they liked each other. We read the Nairobi transcript. When we reached neighbors, half the square breathed like it was a ritual. It is. And a child in a B shirt added a new line. As scripted by Gaia, we did. We're here. Above us, the skyskin parted a mile wide. No parade. Just wind with salt in it, and the smell of green so thick my bones remembered being smaller. An old woman from Ceres put her palm flat on a new seawall and said, "It's smaller than I remembered." A Kijani kid with mud up to his knees said, "It's bigger." And we all let both be true. Later, in the tired hour when good work turns into stories, Juno pinged my cuff from Luna, "Bring me dirt," and a checklist, and a lie about how you didn't cry. I filled a bag with clean loam, folded a dog-eared right of apology form into it, and recorded my most honest lie. Back on the array, we bolted a new plaque under Nairobi's. It was just a prayer disguised as a checklist we'd been using for years. Now with a fifth box watered, fed, rested, neighbored, reported, receipts attached, Gaia sent a last message for the season. No flourish, a footer. Welcome home. Keep the schedule. We did, we will. Because it turned out HFY wasn't a banner on a hill. It was 1,000 hands passing gutters and biscuits and clipboards on time, without drama. Until home was less a place and more a verb we could conjugate together. And when the night side rolled around and Earth's city fire winked like embers rediscovered, I finally let myself cry the way competent people cry, quietly, with the door propped open, because someone might need a wrench,